Immigration enforcement has become a flashpoint again as two more individuals were recently shot and killed during an ICE enforcement operation. And we're hearing reports that the FBI may no longer investigate confrontations with immigration officers. Here in New Jersey, plans are now back on for a detention facility at a warehouse in Roxbury. All the while, advocates continue calling for the closure of Delaney Hall in Newark, where they say detainees are facing abusive conditions and violations of their rights. The ACLU of New Jersey is among them, and we're joined now by senior policy analyst Ami Kachalia. Ami, thanks so much for taking some time to talk to us. We've seen no shortage of headlines in the news lately, whether it be shootings of individuals during an ICE enforcement operation or the New York Times reporting that the FBI will no longer investigate confrontations with immigration officers. I should say that the Justice Department and the Department of Homeland Security have denied that as being true. But you take issue overall with some of the things we've seen here in New Jersey when it comes to ICE enforcement and specifically Delaney Hall. What are your concerns there?
You know, what we've seen at Delaney Hall over the last year really should alarm all of us. Delaney Hall is an immigration detention center here in New Jersey that was opened last May. It's actually the first immigration detention center that was launched during this second Trump administration. And since the very beginning, it's been mired in controversy. We've heard about people who are detained there being subjected to spoiled food, to lack of air conditioning or heat. We've heard about a lot of filth there and severe medical neglect. It is, like many immigration detention centers across the country, known for abuses there. And as we saw earlier this year, people inside Delaney Hall actually took part in a hunger and a labor strike there to protest the conditions that they were experiencing. These conditions are not just at Delaney Hall, I should note. They're at the same time as this hunger strike and labor strike took place, there were at least 5 other hunger strikes taking place at detention centers across the country. For people
I
who
have
are
to
in,
ask I have to ask you, we've heard what you just claimed disputed by many people, including DHS officials, including representatives. Republican Representative Jeff Van Drew went inside, said this place is clean, it's nice, the food is great. Even some Democratic representatives who've gone in have said they're just not seeing all of what's been alleged by detainees. My question to you is, how do we ensure that what's happening inside is following food safety protocol, that immigration enforcement inside is following the Constitution? How do we get this type of assurance?
That's a great question. And really, at the heart of this is this question about accountability, right? One piece that's so important here is for there to be continued robust oversight of Delaney Hall and of other immigration detention facilities. We've seen over the last few year the government try to say that oversight is something that members of Congress cannot engage with. But members of Congress have an authority to conduct visits to immigration detention centers to make sure that they are everything there is done in accordance with the law. And so if anything, what we need right now is stronger oversight over facilities. Over the last couple of months, we've seen a number of members of Congress here in New Jersey make visits to both Delaney Hall and to Elizabeth Detention Center, both of which are facilities in New Jersey. Again and again, we have seen members of Congress come out and share what they have learned, and it has always been really alarming information about both the conditions inside in terms of food and heating and medical access, but also really concerning information about retaliation and abuse that people inside are facing. For example, we heard that after the hunger strike and the labor strike, a number of people inside the facility were transferred out. So if anything, our response to what we're hearing about inside Delaney Hall and other facilities has to be more oversight, more accountability. We need to make sure that there's a light that's shone on what's happening there so that we can then take action to ensure that people are not being kept in these inhumane conditions.
Are you calling for a complete closure of Delaney Hall?
We are, yes. We are calling for a closure of Delaney Hall. We're calling really for an end to immigration detention across the country. There is not, for years and years and years, even before Delaney Hall was opened, We have heard about poor conditions at immigration detention centers across the country. We've heard from people who are detained or who have been detained about what they've experienced. And there's both these conditions that we've talked about, but we've also heard about people being denied access to due process, right? People being moved away from their families, people being moved away from their attorneys. And having seen some of this, it's really important to make sure that as a state and as a broader community, well, we're doing what we can to make sure that everyone has safe conditions in which to live, and importantly,
Ami,
that they also have access to their constitutional protections.
yeah, I want to ask you about that because DHS continues to say that individuals do have and will have due process. What proof do you have that people's civil liberties are being violated?
That's a great question. When it comes to due process, we have seen again and again that there are obstructions that ICE will put up in place to make that keep people from accessing their due process. One piece of this, of course, is that in response to the hunger strike and the labor strike that took place, people have been transferred away from Delaney Hall, farther away from both their attorneys and their families. But it's also just the nature of immigration general detention generally. So, for example, people who are in immigration proceedings are not guaranteed a public defender in the way that we see in the criminal system. And so, for many people who are in detention, they don't have access to an attorney. And the very nature of being detained means that they're not able to actually fight their case in the way that they would if they were not detained, right? They have a harder time accessing resources. They might not be able to put all their paperwork together to fight their case. And so, in some ways, being detained is in itself creating obstructions to people's ability to access due process. One thing we've also
I,
heard about is that people are coerced into signing voluntary departure paperwork that they, don't really understand because it's not translated into their language.
I just have to put into context when we look back at President Obama's term over 8 years, he deported 3 million individuals. He was called the deporter in chief. This is not necessarily a partisan issue. Do you believe that any immigration enforcement should exist in our country?
I think that we have a very broken immigration system, right? We see this both in terms of enforcement and detention, and you're correct that this is not a new issue. But what we do see right now in terms of immigration enforcement is a different kind of enforcement. So, one thing I'll say, right, is that between January last year and March of this year, over 11,000 immigration arrests were made by ICE. And that is about 3 times as many as we saw in the preceding period before then. We're also hearing about violence. We're hearing about masked agents. We know that people's due process is being violated. In some cases, ICE is even saying things like, we don't need a warrant. And so, what we're seeing right now is an escalation and an increasing normalization of violence and an attempt to erode people's rights.
Yeah. All right, we have to leave it there. Ami Kachalia, Senior Policy Analyst for ACLU New Jersey. Thank you so much. Appreciate your perspective today.
Of course. Thanks for having me.